Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us.
Well, welcome to Focus today. I'll tell you, we have a fascinating book that couldn't come more appropriate at this time in our country than what is going on right now with the issue of Benghazi in the news again. And it's been a couple years, but it has always been kind of percolating in the background. What really happened? What do we know about it? And the picture that we're being told, is it really as accurate as what the State Department and some in Congress have been saying, or is there another story to it? Aaron Klein is a New York Times bestselling author. He's written a book called The Real Benghazi Story. And one of the guys that really helped him with writing this book is Joshua Klein. It's great to have you with us, Joshua. Appreciate it. I think this is very appropriate, and I think your background is fascinating too. You were the main researcher for this book, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I did was a senior researcher for the book, put all the material together. It was really divined from, I would say, thousands of pages of government documents that came out from hundreds of hours of watching Senate hearings, House hearings. So everything that's written in this book, it's important to understand that none of it is based on opinion or speculation. Everything we write is factual and based on the facts of the government itself that came out with these documents stating those things.
All right. I want to let our viewers and listeners know that Joshua is an ex-fighter in the Israeli military, and he served as senior researcher for this, as he mentioned. Also, he's the executive producer for the weekend program Aaron Klein Investigates Radio. I'm assuming Aaron is your brother. Am I right?
Yep, he is my older brother.
Okay. I was wondering, I thought there must be a relationship there. You also are a video editor for WND, WorldNet Daily, is that right?
Yeah, I do video editing for them. WorldNet Daily, yeah, it's a huge online website, news website. So I've been involved with them for about 2 years now, and also doing executive producing for Aaron's weekend radio show on CLN.
Okay. Look, I think that all of this really came to head once again after we had the Benghazi hearings, and a lot of us were wondering, we're not hearing the whole thing. It's when Hillary Clinton was before the Senate committee, and she made this statement now that is forever will probably haunt her about why does it really matter the details of what happened. And I think red flags went up in brains throughout the United States and maybe the world saying, well, what happened really does have an impact on what the United States is doing around the globe, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and all of those things. So take us back, realizing that you've got all this information. Let's distill it down. Back in 2012, the United States and Libya, we were in Benghazi. What were we doing there at that consulate?
So right off the bat, that term consulate is incorrect, unfortunately. Most people are under the impression, and rightfully so, because they've been bombarded from the media and with that term consulate or embassy. And really that stems from, if you remember the video story, that they blamed this whole thing on a video, and that escalated into a protest by an embassy that we had in Benghazi. So that story can somewhat make sense, you know, if you can believe that the video happened, but it can only make sense if there was the location of an embassy or a consulate in Benghazi in the first place.
Realizing then that it wasn't a consulate, it wasn't an embassy, from what your research is, what was that facility used for?
So, I mean, we were able to divine certain aspects from open source material from the news reports, and some government documents did come out. And hopefully during the House Select Committee that's starting up actually tomorrow, I would hope that they would try and get some answers on this, because we know that it wasn't a consulate or an embassy. So what sort of activity exactly was going on there? And Benghazi was like downtown terrorism, the center of it in Libya. So primarily, it seems what was going on there, you kind of have to have a little bit of a history lesson. Before Ambassador Christopher Stevens became ambassador, during the overthrow of Gaddafi originally, when the NATO was striking and helping the so-called rebels on the ground, arming them like we're talking about doing now in Syria, providing air power and having rebels fight on the ground for us. That's the exact template that we used in Libya. So in 2011, during this NATO action overthrowing Gaddafi, Christopher Stevens, who wasn't an ambassador at the time, actually was sent in. He was officially, his title was called the liaison to the transitional government, which was really militia groups and terrorist groups based in Benghazi. He arrives there on a Greek cargo ship and hidden in the middle of the night, sets up shop in the same place, Benghazi. This is where the initial mission even is created from, was during this time. And it was that place where he was facilitating weapons to then the so-called rebels. And these so-called rebels actually openly admitted to being known terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists. They admitted that they fought the U.S. in Iraq. They fought the U.S. in Afghanistan. So Christopher Stevens, this was during, again, the overthrow of Gaddafi. He was officially facilitating weapons to these rebels that were terrorists. And, so that's the kind of, that was what the mission was originally set up for in the first place.
So why hasn't this come out more? Why haven't we heard this?
Because people don't, the mainstream media really doesn't have such an interest in emphasizing such aspects of the story for some reason. This is all available. This is straight from the Accountability Review Board, set up by Hillary Clinton to review the actions of what happened in Benghazi. This is all stated in these documents. That was about a 54-page document, and you could see it right there. It's a paragraph or two within it. So that's really that's why we call it the real Benghazi story, because there was so much misinformation originally put out to obviously cover up something. Why would you put out misinformation? Why would you lie to the U.S. people, actually spend their taxpayer money doing it? If there was nothing to cover up in the first place, you could have just been honest and explained what happened. So it's clear there was a cover-up, so what were they covering up? And that's really what we exposed in the book. And really, it's all based, again, on just snippets from thousands of pages of government documents that the media just chose to ignore.
Okay, so let me get this straight then. It was Christopher Stevens was an ambassador, but he was there, you're saying, as in a covert operational mode, kind of sneaked into Libya, setting up shop, but it wasn't a consulate, even though that's what everyone is referring to it as. It was, what did you call it again? More of a special shop of some sort?
So actually, it's interesting that it's called a special mission compound, and okay. So far that the White House actually, when doing, remember the talking points controversy, that was one of the aspects of the scandal. They came out the day before Susan Rice famously went on those 5 talk show hosts, and they said that the only word that they changed in the talking points was the word consulate to special mission compound. So that's how important the terminology is and what it actually means.
All right, so he's in this special mission compound doing what could have been selling arms, which normally I don't think ambassadors get into a direct negotiation with, but you're saying that's what he was doing. So I would imagine that's why the whole security aspect wasn't as it would have been under a normal consulate or an ambassadorship, because this was supposed to be under the radar from what you're saying, right?
It was really, it was under the radar to such an extent that there was no U.S. flag there, obviously. There was they were trying to be covert as possible. They actually requested, in a cable that we point out in the book, they just simply requested a guard tower and a machine gun just in case, they were attacked the same way that they were on September 11th by tremendous amounts of people. The response they got was no, and the reason for that no is that they felt that a guard tower would attract too much attention to this facility. So you can see that the government themselves had an interest in, for some reason, not attracting any attention to a facility that most people think is an embassy or a consulate where you can get your passport renewed.
Wow. Amazing. Okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and talk more about this. We've got the premise now for it all, which is far deeper than what I thought it had been. The book is called The Real Benghazi Story, and our guest is Joshua Klein, who is a senior researcher for this particular book, and we're going to continue our discussion with him in just a couple minutes. Welcome back to Focus Today. Our guest is Joshua Klein. He's a senior researcher for this book called The Real Benghazi Story, written by Klein. And we're finding out things that we hadn't heard before in the news media. I just don't think this was covered anywhere else. Aaron, this is fascinating. Let me, based on the question I have for you next, I want to make sure that I've got this clear again. You're saying that Christopher Stevens, the ambassador, was in Benghazi, Libya in 2012 on a covert operation in a special mission compound, not a consulate or an ambassador location, which I know people might say, well, you're parsing words, except those are specific designations for the function of a building and how it should be protected. And so I think that makes a big difference. Is this why we didn't have the kinds of security that a normal ambassador would have at his residence or at a consulate?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it was an embassy, actually embassies are required to meet a minimum security standard. This facility actually required a waiver. That's where Hillary Clinton's involvement with this building actually gets into the story. It needed a waiver signed because it didn't meet the minimum security requirements to house an ambassador. So the waiver was needed.
And in fact, that's exactly what I want to ask you about. Her particular role in this is, I think it's hard to assume that a Secretary of State would know about every single thing going on around the world, but this seems to be an important enough thing that she should have known about this. From your indication, did she know what was going on with Chris Stevens and the possible selling of military hardware, from what you've said?
I would have to say with 99.9% certainty that yes, because actually, and this is reported by the New York Times and many other outlets, she was actually the architect of this plan to arm rebels now after we did it in Syria, to use that same template and to move on to arm rebels in Syria, which you're actually hearing about in the news right now. Is what we are planning on doing to take out ISIS, is to supposedly arm these rebels. So Clinton herself, she was the architect of this plan. It had the support of the CIA, David Petraeus, and other higher-ups in the military. So she's all over this in so many different aspects.
And so she can't, from what you're saying, plead innocence about, well, I didn't really know about the specific operation of what was going on. You're saying she was intimately involved.
Yeah, if you remember, even Rand Paul, during the questioning of Clinton at the hearing, he asked her specifically about this issue of was there arms transfers going on from this mission onto Turkey, onto Syria via Turkey or any country, and she was parsing her words so specifically. She never said no. She said, I would have to look into it. I would have to get back to you in writing. So she it's an interesting part of the hearing that completely was avoided by her. And supposedly she was going to answer it in the classified version. There was two versions of the Accountability Review Board, one that is known and then the classified version. So I assume that she answered some of these questions there. And then also yesterday we had a bombshell report come out by Cheryl Atkinson, the only one in the mainstream media that did any real reporting on Benghazi and paid a heavy price for it, of, if true, this one of the main people at the State Department at the time that was actually held accountable for what happened. He said that he walked in during the time when the ARB, the Accountability Review Board, was asking for documents, not asking, they subpoenaed them, and they are legally required to turn over every single one. He walked into a basement operation of them separating papers into two stacks, one that they were going to send on to the review board and one that wasn't. If that accusation turns out to be true, then that is a tremendous scandal. It undermines the basis of her entire defense, which was this Accountability Review Board. And if they didn't have access to, most of the information, and she specifically, and they said she was the one calling the shots on that report, which is really interesting.
Well, if Hillary Clinton was in charge of this particular special operation, this mission compound, could she have done that without the president knowing what's going on? Does the Secretary of State, from what you've been able to research, have that latitude?
Officially, she doesn't. I mean, she would need a presidential authority. but it could be very much could be that Obama did not know about it and she went ahead with it anyway. So that's really a question that I'm hoping the Select Committee will get to the bottom of, because if you look at the response that night of Obama, all we know is that he met with the chief of staff and the defense minister for a couple minutes, told them to do whatever you have to do, and kind of went off to bed, and then went to a fundraising event the next day in Vegas. Well, Hillary Clinton was, in the State Department Situation Room, monitoring and responding to this event in real time all night. So why was she so hands-on? What was her interest? And I think that speaks a lot of volumes.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating then, because then what that would do is, although the buck stops here, so to speak, with the president, if he had said, well, do what you need to do, she would have been the kingmaker, so to speak, about the specifics of all of this. Are you expecting more information to come out in hearings? Because the first ones were pretty celebrated. Sometimes the second round is a little bit more of a deflated event. What are you anticipating to have happen with this?
I mean, I hold out hope that we will find out more information, but I am just very suspicious. And I guess you can say because, it took them about 2 years just to form the Select Committee that they could have done 2 years ago if they were interested in that. They had control over the House. They were forced to do it just kicking and screaming because so many people demanded it. So why weren't they, forming the Select Committee 2 years ago? Why are they, only doing it after 2 years of being dragged on? And the possibility is that it could be that this went so high up that there could be some Republicans actually that might be somewhat implicated and had some knowledge also that we document in the book of what was transpiring there, and they wouldn't want that revealed either. So that could be a reason for the reluctance to form a Select Committee.
You've just with what you've said here, and we haven't had a chance to read the book, The Real Benghazi Story by Aaron Klein, you've discussed a lot of things that are critical that I don't think have been made public. What else do we need to know from your research and Aaron's writing in this book that really are important for the American people to understand?
There's just so many different aspects of the lies that we were told and just never really reported on, such as, there were protests, for example, they said that day before in Egypt, and that also had to do with the video, and then that kind of spiraled over into Libya. Well, we actually looked into what were these protests in Egypt. These protests in Egypt had nothing to do with the video, nothing whatsoever. They were planned months in advance. CNN Nick Robinson, actually the day of the protest, during the protest itself, he was reporting on the ground there. And what those protests in Egypt were over was actually something called freeing someone called a blind sheik, who was responsible for the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And we have to kind of go back also a little bit in history at that time. The Egyptian government was overthrown, and Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood was in power at the time. And actually a central platform and a central promise that he made to his people, or that he was going to free the blind sheik. So that's actually what the protest in Egypt preceding the attack in Libya had to do with. We were told that it was, a spillover from that. So just putting that in context really also explains a lot of things. Then just another fact, post this attack, after they blamed the video, they actually went on a week later, a week after the attack, and now we can say 100% that they knew either in real time or for sure at least a day after the attack that it had nothing to do with this video, yet Hillary Clinton and President Obama spent $70,000 of U.S. taxpayer money to air 7 ads in Pakistan a week later to apologize over the video and any offense that it may have caused to the Muslims, and it's just unbelievable that they would do that.
Do you think that a lot of people who are seeing those ads were wondering what in the world were they talking about, because they probably hadn't seen them?
Exactly. So all they accomplished, besides wasting taxpayer money, besides perpetuating a lie more and more onto the U.S. people, all it did was just create more awareness in the Muslim world that had no idea about this obscure video. Now they do, because they're watching these ads, and it actually incited violence. And there was like 50, 60 people killed in the following protest after these ads played. So it accomplished nothing. It'd be terrible consequences.
You know, when these types of things come to light, we would like to think that there is a cause and effect in our government, but I'm seeing so much of what we see happening, people just kind of shrugging their shoulders, and I know I'm speaking in very broad terms, but even Congress, I don't see the resolve to really do much about it. Is there a level of frustration that you and Aaron have when you see the evidence that you've been able to amass to make your case and the reaction that we're getting from our elected leaders and maybe the public at large?
I think the public at large has to do with it. I mean, they're so apathetic. I never would have imagined that the U.S. government, I mean, like, they do things here and there, but would lie, blatantly lie, intentionally, over and over and over again, in so many different people. And I'm not talking about low-level people. The President of the United States of America, the Secretary of State, would go on camera and lie to the American people numerous times. So it really, you know, touched a nerve in me where I kind of just really lost a little bit of faith in just the government of this country and the people that are running it. So that was just really something that touched me in an unfortunate kind of way, just after researching this book.
So what is the next step that you see happening? I mean, is there any chance that you or Aaron could actually be brought before one of the congressional hearings to talk about the research you've done, or is this something that you just don't want to really get into?
It's possible. I can tell you that a lot of the information that we do send over, we send a lot of information over to certain congressmen, and they do use that information then during the hearings to formulate their questions to the witnesses. Rand Paul, we've worked with, and he's done that. He's asked a lot of questions based on our research, yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll be in front of the committee. If they would like us to, I would be more than happy to go there and ask a lot of questions that I would like answered.
Well, I would think that if there's research of value like what you've come up with, that they would do that, but we'll have to see. Josh, it's been great talking with you. Joshua Klein, he's a senior researcher for the book called The Real Benghazi Story, written by Aaron Klein. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate you enlightening us. And I know we've hardly touched any part of it, but you know, what you have mentioned is something that I think is going to spur a lot of people to want to read this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay tuned. Coming up on Focus today, we've got another individual who's been to Israel recently. We're going to be talking to him about his experience there, especially with the conflict with Gaza and Israel. It's all coming up on Focus today.